Hello and welcome to Introvert in Business, a podcast by me, John Baker, that will help you activate your introvert, unlocking the introvert superpowers within your business so that you can more confidently sell and network, that you can unleash more creativity and improve your business performance so that you get a better business. Today's podcast explores introversion from the perspective of personality profiling, and I'm with behaviour and communications expert Michelle Mills-Porter, also known as the People Reader. And just before we start, if you want to get in touch to go into any of the subjects covered in more detail, please feel free. My details are on the podcast, and equally, if you'd like me to speak at your conference or work with your team to help improve productivity, creativity and profitability within your firm, I'd love to speak to you. Michelle, would you like to kind of kick off by introducing yourself?
Hi John, I'm very pleased to be here, so thank you very much. So yes, I'm Michelle Mills-Porter, the only one in the world. My husband says thank God, but it makes me easy to find anyway. But yes, you're right, I'm a behaviour expert and a communication expert, but I probably came from it from a different angle to most. So it was my life experiences really that led me onto this path, and certainly not academia.
Okay, no, brilliant, thank you. One question I ask all my guests, just to begin with, is how do you identify? Are you a raging introvert, a raging extrovert, or somewhere in the middle?
Well, I don't know if I'm raging anything, John.
I'll ask your husband about that.
Yeah, I think I'm certainly very much more comfortable in social situations than a lot of people. So I would have to be down on the extrovert side, but I'm not a raging extrovert in your language by any stretch of the imagination. There are still situations where I feel incredibly shy. And even a bit of a reluctant speaker at some times.
What does your behaviour and personality profiling experience teach you about introverts?
Well, I think, and this is really interesting because I've read some of your work, John, and I think that you say a third of the population is possibly introverted.
The stats I've seen are between a third and half, yeah.
Yeah, I would be a little bit more generous and say, I reckon that half of the population is probably introverted. It's not worth arguing about, but maybe the rest, the missing percentage didn't come forward because they were too shy.
Could well be.
But I think what it teaches me and what it's taught me is that every behaviour type is valid and has an equal amount to give. And I think it's difficult for people who don't understand that and don't appreciate people that are opposite to them. It's difficult for them to be able to get the best out of the people that aren't like them. I treat behaviour profiles as every single one being equal, being as valuable, and just teaching people to explore what those prominent qualities are within all of the different behaviour types.
Okay, so what kind of, if you're working with, I presume you work with teams or groups in some way when you're doing some of this work, and how would you help perhaps an extroverted part of the group to work with the introverts?
Well, what I tend to do is when I first start working with a team, I'll do their individual behaviour profiles, and we'll go through the individual prominent qualities and, just give people a bit of confidence about, who they are themselves. Then what we do is we do a group report, and we do the group report on screen. So if you can imagine, I have a big graph, like a scatter graph, that shows each prominent quality individually. And what we do is we have everyone in the team mapped on that scatter graph. What we then see is that one person may be really, really high in enthusiasm, and somebody might be really, really low in that particular prominent quality. But because of the way that I balance my behaviour profile, there will then be an opposing prominent quality where that person that was very low on enthusiasm will happen to be extremely high on accuracy. and the other person will show as very low. So they're all very balanced, and it gives every single person the opportunity to shine. And they are perfectly balanced. So for every high score, you will get an opposing low score, and vice versa. So it's a way of actually getting other people to appreciate the prominent qualities that that person brings to the party.
Okay, now that's brilliant. Certainly one of the things that lots of introverts will sit there and say is sometimes they are, shall I say, put off by some of the extroverted behaviours that perhaps extroverts don't even realise that are going on. Is that similar when you work with groups?
Yeah, it's the same with every opposite though, John. You know, and I think it tells you what you learn when you delve into behaviour profiling is you learn why it is, who it is that is, is feeling uncomfortable with you. And that tells you a lot about their profile. So for instance, if somebody finds me, and believe it or not, John, this has been said about me before, people might say that I'm intimidating. Now, you know me quite well, so the thought of someone saying I'm intimidating horrifies me. I'm a great big cuddly person, and I would hate anyone to feel intimidated by me. But that shows me as much about their behaviour profile as it does mine, because it shows that they're probably the opposite of me, and therefore it's my opposing qualities that are sticking for them. They're the ones that they're troubled by. And vice versa. So if somebody is particularly loud and effervescent, then it's fairly obvious that the introverts are going to find that quite difficult to handle. But there's, vice versa. Somebody being introverted, they may be seen as being critical, aloof, or judgmental, and they're not. But what that shows is the person that feels that they're critical, judgmental, aloof, bureaucratic, they're probably the extroverts.
Right. So I'm with you. So yeah, as you say, there will be something that each person finds harder to deal with because of their perception of the other person.
Exactly. So behaviour profiling is not just who we are, but it's also how we're perceived by other people. There's no pigeonhole here. I think one thing that people are afraid of when they're talking about behaviour profiling is that they don't want to be pigeonholed, and they don't want to pigeonhole other people. And of course you can't, because we're very complicated creatures, but we are all on the spectrum. So there is no black and white. There's no one particular colour over another. We're all on the spectrum, and it's understanding how complex we are. A behaviour profile can give you lots of signposts and useful traits to watch out for and things like that, but it's not prescriptive. We're all very complicated creatures.
Okay, so I'm now just thinking of, in a sense, the practical steps. So if I understood that I was perceived as being critical or aloof, or if I understood that I was perceived as being loud and effervescent, what could I do with that information?
I think it's easy for me as a speaker, John, because when I go into an audience, I tend to know what kind of profile they're going to be, because it's usually an industry type. So, there will be a large proportion of that audience will be fairly easy to read. And if I'm speaking, then I try and not be so effervescent. I try and dress down a little bit, because I want to build rapport with them. And I don't want them to think, who's this idiot, with a bright colours and a stomping on stage going, hi, how's everyone feeling? I mean, that's just going to alienate an audience of introverts. So I think it's the job of the person that is doing the presenting, in that sense, to actually try and work with the audience and help build rapport. And it's interesting you should say that, because actually it's the extroverts that find it easier to change their behaviour a little bit. Introverts are less likely to be able to change their behaviour that much. So it's a tricky one, but it's just understanding what it is that party has in terms of their values and their prominent qualities.
Okay.
And reflecting that.
So an extrovert tends to be able to change their behaviour more easily, which is actually quite an interesting thing. Let's say I was running a business. I've got, 50, 100 employees, and I realise that I'm upsetting or too loud and effervescent or too something for the introverts that are bound to be in my business. unless I've recruited them all in my own image. What kind of things would I do?
I think, as I said about prominent qualities, if you understand what those people bring to the party and what they're good at, then allow them to play to their strengths. So when we're looking at people who are introverted, the kind of prominent qualities they're likely to have are accuracy, and thoroughness. They tend to be knowledgeable. They're more likely to be the experts in their field. They are more diplomatic because they don't bring emotions into the discussion, so they can be much more diplomatic. They're the ones that will keep an organisation safe in terms of adhering to the rules and the regulations and the laws. They're the people that you can rely on to make sure that something is done accurately, to make sure something is done thoroughly. But you need to be able to give them more time to be able to finish their work before they hand it over, because they will hold on to it until they absolutely are sure that it's accurate and precise before they hand it over. So they might need a little bit more time, and it's understanding those nuances in terms of what you need to give them in order to support them to be able to show those prominent qualities and allow them to shine.
Okay, now that's really useful. So, I mean, just picking up a couple of the key points that I've heard you talk about, Michelle. So the first thing, which is really important to me, was that all personality types are valid and everyone has an equal amount to give, but they've got different skills and different ways of giving it.
Exactly.
And that quite often you're going to have, I can't remember your exact wording, Michelle, but you've got some opposite types of skills. So somebody that is introverted is quiet. They've got some opposing skills which might make them more accurate or more knowledgeable and expert.
Yes. And
so one of the important things to do when working with a team, or I guess working with yourself, if I just knew that I was an introvert and I wanted to improve the way I worked with my own team, whichever way you're doing that, it's about knowing your opposing skills and being able to allow others around you to use theirs.
Yeah, now I've just been working with an organisation, and there was one person in particular who was introverted. She had a lot of skills to bring to the role, but actually she was being asked to do things that were completely against her prominent qualities. And in doing that, what they were doing is actually expending far more energy from that person, because they're asking her to do things outside of her comfort zone. And what that does is it draws energy from that person, and it takes the shine off all the things that they're really good at, because they're stretching themselves too thinly. So my advice was to stop making this person go out there and be the face of the organisation. That's not in their comfort zone. It's not what they're good at. Let somebody else do that, and then this person can step into the role and handle the information and the data afterwards, and do the structure and the support work and all of that stuff that they really shine at. By playing to people's strengths, you allow them to perform at their very best, and to actually save as much energy as they can, because they're working within their comfort zone and not outside of it.
No, that's fantastic. And I think that's a really good example of what we were talking about. So thank you for that. Kind of just about time to wrap up, I'm afraid. We could carry on talking for hours, I'm sure. But is there any other bits of advice you'd give people in terms of working with introverts, or shall I put it more generally and say of different personality types?
Well, I'm quite happy to stay on the introvert theme. And I think, like I keep saying, it's about understanding the prominent qualities. Understand that the people that are extrovert have certainly got talents, and the people that are introvert understand that they are likely to be more nurturing, more reliable, more supportive, more collaborative, more accurate, more thorough, more structured. And if you understand that that's what they can bring to the party, then just allow them to work within their strengths, and don't try and make them step out of their comfort zone, because you will get less performance.
Okay.
So this is all about getting more performance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One thing that you said there, which I'd be interested in your thoughts on as an expert, because I've come across this several times before. Just because your profile says you are an introvert or an extrovert or a whatever other things you want, that doesn't mean they're the only things I am an introvert, and yet I know I can, if I want to, go out and be loud. So these are profiles, but they're not telling you exactly the only things you can do. That's the way I understand it. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. So let me explain. I do profiles for people all the time. And what I try to explain is a profile, doing your behaviour profile is almost like a snapshot. It's almost like a photograph of your most regular behaviour, what you're most likely to do. But it's not exhaustive. You can step in and out of that behaviour on a regular basis. This is just the mean average of your behaviour. You tend to do this more than the opposite. So that behaviour profile, it's not an excuse for you to hide behind it and say, well, that's me, and that's all I can do.
Damn, I was hoping I could.
Yeah, but it is absolutely a guide for you to be able to know exactly where you're going to be most productive.
And presumably the other part, and that explains your other piece, which is if I chose to step out of my typical behaviour, I will find it more tiring.
Yeah, you will find that when you get home from work at night and then you fall asleep on the sofa, that you're not as fresh as you might be in the morning, and it's stressful. It takes energy and it's stressful. So some of the key points to look out for when an introvert is under pressure, you may see signs of them becoming a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more fussy, a little bit more concerned about the rules, relying on the rule book a little bit more, double checking everything. You may see that they become more critical than you've seen them before. Those are surefire signs that you're dealing with an introvert who is now in a stressful situation. If you don't do something about it, it's your responsibility as an employer to be able to pick that up and do something about it and put them back in their comfort zone so that you can get the best productivity out of them and that they can perform at their best energy. Otherwise, things are just going to go downhill.
So, Michelle, that was incredibly useful. Thank you. Just a quick one for you. If there's anybody that's been listening to this podcast that wants to get back in touch with you, how can they do that?
Well, I'm quite prolific on LinkedIn, quite extrovert on LinkedIn, so that's always a good place to find me. And as I said, there's only one Michelle Mills-Porter, so I'm fairly easy to find there. But if you want to look up my website, it's mmp.uk.com, so MMP for Michelle Mills-Porter.
That is superb. Michelle, thank you very, very much. I've loved chatting to you, and look forward to catching up with you again soon.